Netcat is known as the Swiss Army knife of networking tools, and for good reason. It's really a networking utility that operates bidirectionally. And what that means is that it can actually read data from one endpoint and write it to another, effectively allowing it to act as both a client and a server at the same time. And this makes it extremely versatile. It can perform tasks like creating a chat application and connecting remote shells, and even including file transfers. And in this lab, we're actually going to do all three of those things to demonstrate its usefulness. So let's dive in. We write NC on the command line for Netcat, so let's run a quick what is command on it. And this is actually a really good description of it. It's for arbitrary TCP and UDP connections and listening. So let's do attack H and see some of the commands. And what we need to do first with Netcat is we need to create a listener. And in order to do that, we need to run it with the tac-l command. And then, like with all network connections, we need a port. So tac-p can allow us to specify one. So let's set that up now. We'll run a nc tac-lp, and any port number will do, but I think a port over 9,000 seems like a good number, and I hope you caught that reference. So now that we've set this Netcat listener, we'll leave that there and just listen. And now over to the Windows box. And Netcat between Windows and Linux can sometimes have different type of flags, so it's always worth checking with attack H. And what we want to do now is we want to establish a connection, and we're going to send a file through this connection. So first things first, let's go and create a file. So let's do an echo statement, and let's just say Gondor calls for aid, and let's put that inside of help.txt. Now, what we need to do is send the output of help.txt to our Linux box. So first we need a command to print a standard out. And the type command on a file name will do just that inside of Windows, sort of like cat. Now, the next step is to get that standard out and redirect it to the Netcat connection. And in this case, the pipe operator works pretty well. We can actually pipe it into a Netcat connection connecting to our Linux system. And now all we need to do from this end is just provide the IP of the Linux system along with the port that we specified as the listener. Now you see it hung up, and that's actually totally fine. So we can see that the message of Gondor calls for aid was transmitted over to the Linux system. That's actually pretty cool. So now we can terminate this connection because at this point it's just hanging up. There's nothing else to send through this Netcat connection from Windows to Linux. And instead, we can actually transmit this message into a file now. Now in order to do that, we need another listener. So hit the up arrow key, and this time we're actually going to redirect what we receive into a file. And we can make any file name we want, so just redirect it to the message.txt. And now over in Windows, all we need to do is send that message over once again. So let's do that, and it's going to hang up again. That's totally fine. And now what we've done is we've created this open connection where Windows is just sending data over to the Linux system, and whatever Linux receives, it's just going to write to a file. And in this case, we're only sending the standard out from help.txt. So we need to go ahead and actually cut off the connection now because nothing else will happen. All right, cool. So at this point now, we should be able to run a quick ls, and we can see we've recorded it to a file, and now we have this file. It says Gondor calls for aid. And that's actually really cool, right? We can just open up a connection between two endpoints now and just funnel data right over and store it just as we'd like. So now let's do that again, but this time not transmit any files. Let's just open up another Netcat connection, same listener again, and then we'll hit enter to start listening. And now back inside the Windows system, we're just going to dial out over to Linux. So without that type help.txt pipe. And now we have an open connection. So I can send messages here from Windows. So let's just go ahead and say something like, this is from Aragorn, and say the beacons are lit. Gondor calls for aid. And when we go over to the Linux box waiting for messages, we should be able to see that message coming from Aragorn. And of course, Theoden King will now respond and think about it for a moment and say, and Rohan will answer. And that's my best effort at something theatric for now. But you get the point. So not bad for a little impromptu chat server, right? So let's take a look at one last example now, and that would be to go ahead and send a command or a tool or software through. In this case, we're going to send a shell, more specifically a CMD session. So let's set up the listener again from Linux. Same thing, same port. And over in the Windows box, let's take a look at the Netcat help. And we can see that if we actually use the TAC-E flag, we can send a program. And that's what we're going to do. We're actually going to send cmd.exe. So we'll dial back out to Linux, and at the end, put TAC-E cmd.exe and hit enter. And look at that. We've actually sent a remote connection over. So now I'm in my Linux system, but I'm connected to my Windows box. So now let's send a little statement, echo that Rohan has arrived, and we've arrived with a reverse shell, actually. And honestly, you can do a ton more with Netcat. You can even scrape websites. It's extremely useful. It's called the Swiss Army knife for a reason, as you can see. Very little overhead, very lightweight, and that bidirectional data capability transfer over TCP or UDP connections as you need, that's what makes all this possible that you've seen inside the lab. And that includes setting up that reverse shell. And we're not going to get too deep into that right now, but that's sort of what ethical hackers do, and even threat actors, is they'll dial out back to their listening machines and send a program over and have a shell connected like that. So in essence, congratulations on your first little hack as well too, and a little unofficial welcome to the red teaming side at the same time.